Welcome to the ArcFlash podcast, sparking new ideas in the data center sector. I'm Kevin Aboden.
And I'm Jabez and we're here to provide a balanced, nuanced, and hopefully unbiased view on the state and most pressing topics affecting the data center and hyperscale cloud industry. We all want to see our industry succeed, but we're also not naive cheerleaders nor doomsayers. What we ultimately believe is the best way forward is to see the industry experience sustainable growth by addressing and being transparent with the challenges and sharing key themes and trends that are unfolding in this sector. Both Kevin and I have been in this space and covered the space for a long time. And we're really excited to have one of our own, a fellow research guy as well, Xavier Plowright. Hopefully, I pronounced your name right on the pod today.
Yeah.
So, welcome, Xavier.
Well, thank you for having me all. And again, it's an industry I'm very passionate about, the one that I've worked in for 6 or 7 years now. So I'm very delighted to be on this podcast to speak with some like-minded individuals.
And maybe to start off with, maybe you could lead off with a little of what your role at JLL entails, and then we could go into a little bit more market discussion.
Yeah, so my time is split. So half of my time is dedicated towards the stats. So looking at the European or EMEA markets, but primarily looking at Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, Paris, Dublin, Madrid, and Berlin. So yeah, just doing our monthly and quarterly stats. And the other half of my time is a more strategy-driven focus. So working with key clients, individuals, about what their possible expansion plans could be and what sort of makes sense as a next step for them.
And starting off with some of those key markets they mentioned, those flap D markets, as everyone calls them. I mean, Frankfurt's been on fire forever, and every bit of capacity gets taken. Right, Amsterdam, Dublin, they've had their power restrictions. How's the landscape looking, and what are you seeing as the bright spots, as opposed to all the negative headlines we've been seeing lately?
Yeah. So Frankfurt, yeah, I would say it pretty much emerged as a result of what happened in Amsterdam with the moratorium, and since then it's been a powerhouse in Europe. And although media mentions how difficult it is to get land, you know, a lot of people are getting it done. Um, there's been a couple of transactions that we've worked on at JLL where we've had some success in the past year. So bring on some pretty significant sites. But it does bring on the question about like how far are the parameters of Frankfurt. You're seeing some sites pop up around Mainz now, which is a lot further south. But as I say, it's difficult, but people are making it happen. So if you're in the know, it can be done. It just takes some time and the right research and data points, and knowing the right brokers. Hint, hint. To sort of make it happen. Um, yeah, you look at a lot of the other markets that in flat D, you really pinpoint on the AZ zones. But in Frankfurt, it's sort of that AI approach already. To be fair, it's anywhere you can get something is pretty much a slam dunk. That's how I pretty much describe Frankfurt. If you get something of significance, it's going to be a tougher job selling it than it is to. It's going to be easier selling it than it is going to be a more difficult situation as you have in some other markets. On the contrary, though, you start looking at the leader. Sorry, London. It's difficult because there's been some recent press about what's going on in Slough. I think it's pretty much known what's going on around the IVB situation, how it's pretty much oversubscribed already, and it's not yet started construction. And at the same breath, a lot of operators are trying to bring on sites that are currently on the green belt, which have been denied. Um, those applications will go in again, but at the same time, you've got the state saying that they want the UK to be a real powerhouse within the AI space, and the UK being at the forefront of like the digital transformation, and being a major contributor to GDP and all those things. But at the same time, they're going against these sites that obviously we know enable it to happen. So it's a difficult situation. So as a result, you're probably going to see a lot of those, the eastern side of London or other pockets of sites that were traditionally not so popular start to become that. That's yet to happen. But, last year we did start to see a shift in workloads, which was pretty interesting. Some of the cloud players started looking east to the more network and storage side of data centers, towards where latency isn't so dependent, and then keeping the processing part within those key AZ zones, which is pretty interesting. And you've seen people start to shift what they've already got to make this stuff happen. We're always talking about procuring new space, but people are looking at in-house first. And at the same breath, that really resonates with the whole AI discussion too, because what you're seeing on some of those, or what I've seen, I should say, on some of those leases that they've had for a number of years that's come into an end, reconfiguring some of that space to be able to deal with some of the kilowatts that an AI platform would require. So, if we was at the 8 kilowatt mark, trashing a lot of that stock and putting in something a lot that can handle a lot more denser workloads. So, and I look at that as a makeshift solution as we can as we can understand what AI is going to become, because I'm still under the impression that we don't actually know what it is yet.
Yeah, and Xavier, that's pretty consistent with how the same discussions that we're having on the research side with the impact of AI on data center demand. I think most people don't really understand where it's headed today, and rightly so, because it is so new and nascent. And so what my view is, and feel free to let me know if you hear contrary to the point, but a lot of the AI, quote unquote, AI deployments today are basically being infused together with traditional cloud AZ clusters today. So because the hyperscalers themselves don't know what the real curve or runway is, or even the adoption is for AI applications today, that a lot of the inference and training stuff is still happening within the context of the general cloud region, cloud availability zone infrastructure. And so what we've seen in Asia, and I'm not sure where you're seeing that in Europe as well, is that the cloud AZ kind of capacity requirements and demand, the sizes of megawatts that they're taking down are just getting larger and larger, because they do know that they will continue to need a lot of capacity in the core tier one markets, like you mentioned. But they also don't know if they're ready yet to do dedicated AI factories. As just Wang sort of coined that phrase, AI factories that are specific to training. And I think part of it is also because they don't have the cooling quite figured out yet for how they are going to optimally cool these GPU clusters that they're training these applications on. So I'm not sure if you're seeing that play out in the tier one markets in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, so what you have had, so what you have had of late is a load of requirements. We was talking about this before, but that just you come out with this whole anywhere approach. So you're seeing like an odd 10, maybe 20 megawatt requirement just pop up. And, traditionally that would have been, looked to be the markets that I look at all the time. But because there isn't a lot of capacity, because it's all been pre-let, it's just, we'll take 10, 20 megawatts going anywhere. So, I mean, that's kind of a shift in focus in that sense. And I look at AI as more of a global discussion rather than looking at it, region to region. I think because we're so early in the journey, you got to take it from the highest point. And, some of those cloud players are pretty lucky in the sense of their land banking, that they can kind of know exactly where they want to go and where they're going to store their LLM sites, sort of working out the inference as they go along the journey as well, matching that up. other players that haven't had a, you know, they've always had a self-build approach, but not been as far along with the self-build journey and having a land bank to leverage, they're going to have to do that at the same time. So, it's going to be a lot slower, and at the same time, have to work out how that connects, how your inference and your LLMs are going to connect up in Europe. But I don't know. You've got people looking all over the globe, and being near large substations in these weird and wonderful places. Um, but yeah, it's very much a global thing, and just trying to tap into what they have already and work from there, and that being a starting block, is kind of what I'm seeing from the folks.
And do you have an opinion on like certain secondary markets that will eventually grow because of this? I know we've talked in the past about certain markets that you had your eye on. I mean, would this possibly be more of a Nordic swing? Would this be more of a Southern Europe swing, Eastern Europe? Where are you seeing some of that fill-in that could happen?
Yeah, I think the Nordics is always a first point of call, a first point of call because of the ability to match or align with sustainability targets and the ability to get renewable sources of energy as well. There's always some question marks that come around it because only certain areas that are actually interesting because of the transmission issues that you get. The generation part it's a massive tick, but the transmission part is a bit, as I say, a question mark. But it'll always be a focus point, and there's already some of the, or yeah, at least two out of the three of the big guys that are already up in the Nordics. It could be 3 out of 3. I'm just escaping me right now. That already got a huge presence there, and it's. I hate to use this term because one of my colleagues uses, but it's like a 8-year-old soccer team. Everyone just goes around the ball. When the ball's already there, that's where everyone sort of goes, right? And because they've already got that flag in the ground, that's all what's happening. So there are other places up in Eastern Europe because energy is quite cheap over there. That's conversations that I've had that's ongoing, and people looking, as I say, near some of those large substations, to be able to leverage some excess power that's not currently being utilized is probably the next step. And but as you say that, the appetite for the amount of megawatts that people are looking for day one, and 5 to 10 year roadmap is probably you know a gigawatt's an understatement. And you're never really going to find a place that's got a gigawatt readily available. You're going to start with 200 megawatts, and you speak to these people and they think that's loads. That's enough. That's enough energy to do how many other houses and all of this, but not for the type of business that we're in. So that's quickly going to get consumed, and that could probably be happening in the next 18 months, 2 years or so. So we're going to have to start looking at alternative solutions, to sort of make that happen. People talk about hydro, but I'm not. I'm very much a skeptic when it comes to the hydro side of things because it's more expensive. So I mean, we're in a business, right? You want to be doing stuff that's cost efficient. So although hydro sounds sexy, I mean, when I first started JLL, it was one of the first things I was looking at, and it's still. I don't know I can't remember the numbers now, but it's 1.52x or whatever the cost is at the minute for traditional power. So yeah, the viability of it is a question mark.
Yeah, to your point, Xavier, the 200 megawatts seems big, but people don't understand that the 200 megawatts of capacity only satisfies 1 out of 3 AZs for a single hyperscaler. You have to multiply that by 3 because there's 3 big hyperscalers, and 200 is only the bare minimum for one AZ. So you do the math, and you can get easily some really crazy numbers there if you do some creative modeling. And Xavier, I want to also let people know about the work that you're doing around hyperscale tracking and leasing, because I think that's something that's underappreciated with what you guys do. Can you tell us sort of what you're doing around that without sharing anything super secret saucy or proprietary?
Yeah, and before I even start, I'll start with the origin of the thought. Um, so I, as I say, I do the stats at JLL, and the numbers that people look to a lot of the time is the pre-leasing and the take up, how those megawatts are distributed on a year-on-year basis. And then you map that against the supply or new supply, whatever it may be. Um, and then you round up a conclusion of what's the status of that market. For me, that doesn't feel like the best way to do things, and doesn't give you a true reflection of demand. Although you can do a sum of those deals, you can and it's going to give you a number, and that's going to relate to how many megawatts is consumed by each various customer. I think we need to shift our thought process to talk more about demand and what some of the signals are that we know that are constants for looking at new markets, to understand what the overall or the potential consumption of megawatts will be in those various places. Because I talk about tier one and tier two markets, the Madrids, the Berlins, the Warsaws, the Milans, but those behave in such a way that you can almost call them tier ones. Like the last quarter, it was around about 35 megawatts that was consumed by the hyperscalers in Madrid. That's really chunky, especially given the size of the market, right? It's like 3 or 4 times that, and 25% being consumed in a single quarter is huge. But I think it's more interesting to understand like what the potential is of those metros, especially at the same time people are looking at securing sites in Barcelona now. Okay, so let's start mapping that conversation. At the same time as a tier two emerging, you're also seeing a tier three. I'm quite interested to see how we can look at a more macro or primarily European, but who's to say that it can't be global, of what the potential is of all these markets and what the excess supply of a market is, or the excess demand of a market is, and start mapping up markets or metros in that way seems like the more logical way to make business decisions, in my opinion. And I
And
must
then
add at the same time, before I finish, and it's also because I know that in making these decisions, a lot of it is driven by the conversation that's had with a hyperscaler, and those signals are the driving force for to relinquish money by your investor. But don't be fooled, that conversation isn't just to you. Although you might have a good relationship because you've done X amount of business, it's whoever brings the sexiest pie to the table in the right amount of time that also has the romance power. Oh yeah, by the way, you're both going for that same power permitting thing. So yeah, there isn't much differentiating a lot of the operators, but I think if you start taking that more data driven approach, some people are doing it, and some people have got their own way of doing it. I'm not saying there isn't any, but if we as an industry did that, we can start seeing, um, more opportunities.
And that
I
would
think.
help a lot of the capital that's trying to move into the sector too, right? Like, so there's still a lot of capital on the sidelines trying to figure out how to enter, and they need a strategy. And so I think this kind of thought process would help them. Okay, this market's a little undersized by this definition, so why don't we try to go there for our initial growth or something of that kind.
Yeah, it's a challenge because the data center industry has got. God, I sound like such an ass. That we've gotten to this point, um, with experts into the industry, and the experts. The reason why they're called experts is because they know their stuff. The people that have got this massive bank wad of cash that they want to invest in. I'm not saying none of them know what they're talking about, but a lot of them, this is new to them. So when you've got this much money on the line, which is probably someone's job on the line as well, which is someone's livelihood and all the rest of it, you want to be making sure you're spending your money wisely. And if someone's telling you, well, I know this industry, I've been doing it for 10 years. I mean, for someone that's got to give you like £1 billion, dollars, or whatever the currency, that's not enough to fly. So this is what I'm saying. We need something that you can actually scrutinize a little bit, poke some holes in, and you can actually, showcase your logic and bring your experience in as a secondary layer rather than being the front line as to why you've gotten here, especially because we know our industry is changing. We wasn't talking about AI 18 months ago. So yeah, there's so many different variables now that need to be considered as to why you wait up going to Frankfurt instead of going to Barcelona, or going to Barcelona instead of Vienna. You need to consider the whole macro picture. Like I had a conversation the other day, and some people were telling me about going to Israel. I mean, certain situations may mean that you need to be there, but would you weight that up against going to, as I said, I'll just keep using Barcelona as a point of reference? Probably not, because of because what's going on over there. You've got to consider, the data is going to tell you one thing. You need to be able to put that layer on top, the expertise level. But if you've got the people to do that part, then you've got a winning formula, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And sometimes you get companies that are trying to do all at once, and that's a more interesting argument.
Oh, the
We have to
shotgun
figure.
approach, the
Yeah,
beloved shotgun.
exactly.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, seeing if the poo sticks. It doesn't sound as good when it doesn't sound.
Well, perhaps we might not put that on the headline of this episode, but I get your point.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to say that in a proper way that's PG, but yeah, it's yeah, you've got to be focused, especially. And there's a couple of companies where you've made a lot of investment in various markets, but as a result, you actually can't progress to get past a certain stage until you sign a customer. And because you haven't signed that customer in this one spot, you can't do the pre-construction work on this other site where there is interest. And taking the whole shotgun approach is just unfocused. It's a bit. I'm speaking a bit too harsh here, but I think it's a bit lazy. Because if he was focused and knew what the objectives were, and I'm going to mention a company, well, I'm not going to mention their name, but they've got a couple of sites up in Frankfurt, but they bought that as an agricultural plot of land, done the power, done the permitting themselves, and now have ended up doing a lease, a 56 megawatt lease as well, a significant chunk of that site. But yeah, they knew from the get go what it would take. It would take them 3 years to be able to get to this stage, and what do you know? It falls perfectly in line when there is a massive excess of demand in Frankfurt, and they've reaped the benefits and seen the financial benefits of them doing it themselves, and not buying a site that already had the power and permitting. Where there's, a site in Frankfurt is probably about 14, 15 million euros an acre. Yeah, so they would have bought it for chump change at the time. At the time, when you look at those multiples, and that's where a lot of the wins are. even if, as an investor, by the way, you just got the site in a decent location in a hot market, got the permitting, got the power letter. You've already made money before you even thought to bring on a tenant. I mean, there's not a lot of people doing that these days.
Yeah, I think that's why you
Yeah,
see a
to
lot
be
of real
ridiculous.
estate developers coming into the space, like the ESRs or the Goodmans or the Logos. It's because they have that ability to land bank and be patient with that type of. Well, I think it's a lot of them are calling power banking now because of how power availability is now the key constraint in a lot of these core tier one markets. So there's definitely a
Yeah,
more diverse ecosystem of players.
yeah. I have to say the sentence, and Kev, you know what's coming. Power is the linchpin of our industry.
Word of the day. Word of the day.
Boom, mic drop.
I'm out of here. Yeah, no, it's. I mean, we're at the mercy of what's happening with the whole power situation. I mentioned the Ivor situation again. We've had. Well, it's changing in London. There has been instances of power being moved from or traded, if you want. But the national grid is changing that, coming in with new law, new methodology as to how you get power up in London / the UK. With now providing a letter of how this is going to be used, how the power is going to be used. The way I read that, the way Xavier reads that is, you basically got to have a customer sign to say when that power roadmap is going to be delivered and distributed to your end tenants, so then they can plan on their side because of a lack of planning that they've had before, and no fault of their own, because data centers blew up in London. So they can add some forecasting as to how power is going to be utilized, because we haven't had that sort of tracking before. So I'd say the grids are getting a bit smarter now. You start talking about what happened in Amsterdam. Once upon a time, I was getting questions regarding, is Amsterdam ever going to rise again? I look at Amsterdam as being early to the party and early to the problem, understanding that the rate that data centers was moving at was too much for the grid to be able to cope with. And as such, they did a pause back in 2019 or 2020. No, 2019 ended in 2020. And now they've got structure, parameters, definitions as to where, what, when things can happen. And now I think that's a method that's on the way to being a European thing. You've seen it in Dublin start. EirGrid or ErGrid, pausing all new applications, basically forcing operators to look elsewhere in Ireland, which is interesting. Which is obviously going to raise jobs, GDP of cities in Ireland as well, which is a great push. Frankfurt, people were intervening, and there's been rumours of a similar story to what you've got in Dublin, which I didn't actually finish that point. So what they're also saying is, for each megawatt that you consume, you need to be able to distribute that back to the grid, that they can be able to take that at any time. So what people are doing is building energy centers for their data centers to go back on as well. Those conversations are being rumored in Frankfurt as well, and to push that narrative at the same time, they're trying to offer some incentives to do that too, such as getting your power a bit earlier. So that could be a differential in the marketplace at some point as well. I think that's 2026 is when that's rumored to change. But yeah, I think the grids are getting a lot smarter about how things are happening. It just means you need to be a bit more laser focused and know what you've got, know what you haven't, to be able to do these things, and what you're able to do. Sorry, as well.
I can't think of a better note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be keeping track very closely, and as will everyone else, on your upcoming research releases. So, have a great rest of your week, everyone, and we'll be seeing you very soon with another new episode. Take care.
Thanks, Xavier.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for your time. Thanks everyone as well.